Hey, welcome back. This is my second video in the series about sexual harassment in church spaces, perverts and the pews. If you haven't seen the first one, the one about a man I call the Predator, who chased me out of a church that I loved, I'll link it in the description below. When the Predator first started harassing me, it didn't go unnoticed. The guy who sat next to him in the choir actually told him, to his face, to back off. And I appreciated that. I even thanked him for it. But as the months went on, I started to notice something else. This choir guy, let's call him Chester, wasn't just being friendly. He was laying the groundwork for something rather sinister. Over time, Chester started opening up. He told me he'd once held a leadership position at a white evangelical non-denominational church in another state. He was divorced and he had a daughter, and according to him, he had been wronged by the family court system. He told me about his community of men who were fighting for men's rights. Their claim? That judges were out to persecute fathers, as if the entire legal system existed just to torment them. This was in the early 2000s, before the term Manosphere became a thing. But the forums Chester described on Reddit in the early days, they were a breeding ground. What started as complaints about custody battles metastasized into an entire cesspool of misogyny, pickup artists, red pill incels, and men who blame women for everything that was wrong in their lives and the entire world. What they all have in common is entitlement. Entitlement to women's bodies. Entitlement to women's attention. Entitlement to women's time and unpaid labor. And when they don't get what they feel they're entitled to, some turn to violence. The connection between this kind of misogynist ideology and real-world violence is very well documented. These are the men who walk into public spaces and open fire. If you want to learn more about that, I have linked a very good resource, Man Up, The New Misogyny and the Rise of Violent Extremism by Cynthia Miller Idris, below. Meanwhile, back to Chester. I kept my responses neutral. I really didn't want to debate men's rights ideology during choir rehearsal or coffee hour after church. So I just let Chester talk. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't agreeing with him, I was just observing. I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter in college, and I knew how abusers weaponized custody battles to maintain control. I suspect that there was a very good reason why the court didn't give him custody. And turns out, I was right. One night, Chester finally said the quiet part out loud. He told me his ex-wife had falsely accused him of molesting his daughter, that he'd gone to prison for it. And now he couldn't get a good job because of that, and he was forced to live in this tiny little efficiency apartment, and he had to pay child support for a child he wasn't allowed to see. It was the pity party of the century, and he wanted me to bring the balloons. Meanwhile, the hair on the back of my neck was literally standing up. I was at that point 99% sure that he did actually do what he was accused of. He'd been convicted by a jury of his peers, and he'd done hard time. Meanwhile, at this time, I was working on my books about my own childhood sex abuse experiences, so I let Chester talk, and he kind of became a science experiment. I wanted to understand how someone like him thought, and how he could justify to himself what he'd done. And here's what I learned. Number one, he was as slippery as an eel. Getting him to take responsibility for absolutely anything about how his life turned out was like trying to nail Jell-O to a tree. Nothing was his fault. Most things were his ex's fault, and if directly confronted, he'd just deny everything no matter what. One night I said to him, "Seems like it would be kind of hard to provide evidence if you didn't do it." "Well, she got my daughter to lie to a therapist and poison her against me and blah 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 blah." Number two, he's a professional victim. He complained constantly about his low-paying job as an usher at the Pittsburgh Symphony, and about how the young women he worked with, who were at least 25 years younger than him, refused to date him. Can you imagine? And then he complained about how they had the nerve to complain to his boss about him. He had absolutely no plans to improve his life, and it was just all about getting everyone to feel sorry for him. So another day, for shits and giggles, I asked him if he wanted to read my manuscript. Given his background, I was actually curious about his opinion, and he came up with a million excuses not to read it. He had dyslexia, his glasses were defective. Never really learned to read, don't you know? Yeah, I get it. The last thing you want to hear about is how this actually affects real people. Then came the moment that made everything click. Chester had picked up on gossip about my impending divorce, so one Sunday at the church coffee hour, he pounced. Hey, if you need help babysitting Henry, I'd be happy to help. I work evenings so I could watch him while you work. My blood ran ice cold. And that's when I realized he'd been grooming me. All the pity stories, all the claims of being falsely accused, all the attempts to gain my sympathy, that was his groundwork. I told him no thanks. My parents were watching Henry, and he looked a little disappointed, but he didn't press. The very next day, I get this panicked phone call from the associate pastor. A little bird told me that Chester offered to babysit for you. You didn't take him up on it, I hope, because he has significant pastoral counseling issues. Oh, you mean how he molested his daughter and went to prison? The pastor was stunned. How did you know? He told me himself, and then he tried to convince me he was falsely accused, but I don't believe him. Very soon after, Chester announced he was leaving our church. He claimed it was because they wouldn't give him any choir solos. But he'd been there for years, and he knew full well that solos were reserved for the paid choir leads. I suspect he was asked to leave, and this was just his way of saving face. So off he went to another church to find other young mothers to groom. So Chester may have left, but the lesson stayed. These days, things are much better. Churches now require background checks for anyone working with children. Insurance companies audit congregations to make sure that these policies are followed. Even non-denominational churches, those without formal governing structures, are not exempt because of the insurance. The legal liability is a real thing. Ministerial candidates are screened before they even begin training, and I'm told that the Jerry Sandusky scandal was the watershed moment for most of these denominations. That's when these policies became non-negotiable. And that matters because speaking out does bring change. Still, you need to stay alert. Abusers are very charming, they're cunning, and they blend in. And they unfortunately don't have Mr. Yuck stickers tattooed in the middle of their foreheads. You should never trust someone just because they go to your church. And men offering to babysit? That's a red flag. Heck, that's enough red flags for a communist parade. If you found this video interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe. And if you've had an experience of being groomed by a predator at church, please feel free to share your experiences in the comments below. And next time, join me for a story from 50 years ago, my father's mid-century church sex scandal. Until then, stay safe and keep choosing that bear.